We're talking today with John Michael Fields of Wyoming, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Fields, can you begin with a little bit of background on yourself? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in December of 1939 in Seattle, Washington, but was only there a month or so, and my mother returned to Southern California, me with my father and my older sister.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much where I lived, in different towns around Los Angeles until I was 7 years old.
Okay.
Then we moved to Oregon.
All right. Now, what did your family do for a living at that time?
My father worked at a defense plant in the beginning. At that time, it was called Consolidated, Vultee Aircraft Corporation. Later, it changed it to Convair, which is a more familiar name to most people.
Yeah.
And but they were building B-24s and working on the B-36 then. But I can remember taking him to work and seeing these acres and acres of B-24s on the parking ramp under camouflage netting out there, and all painted camo.
All right.
It's
And then you moved to Oregon then when you were about 7?
right.
And then what was your family doing then?
Well, my dad was a mechanic, a diesel mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for a Caterpillar franchise.
All right. And then did you just go to school there and
Yeah.
go through high school?
Yeah, and I knew it by the end of high school. Well, back then, you faced the draft when you turned 18. And I didn't mind that so much, but I didn't want to be in the Army. And I'd march everywhere. And I didn't want to be in the Navy, be out to sea 6 months at a time. And I loved airplanes. So,
That's right. You kind of grew up with them in a way.
and like most kids at the time, the other thing I looked at is I thought they had the best looking uniform, except for the Marine Corps Blues.
All right. So basically, you figured you would enlist in the Air Force before Uncle Sam decided to call you up anyway?
Yeah,
All right.
that was part of it. Like I said, I wanted to go in anyway. I was not trained, I had general education. I was not really trained for anything else. It was a small farming community, and I did not want to be a farmer. And not downing farmers. America's farmers feed the world, and I have a lot of respect for them. And they work very hard. So, but it wasn't my cup of tea.
Okay. So the military at this point looked like a good option.
Right.
Kind of move on and
Right.
move towards some kind of career. Did you have any thoughts that you might stay in for a long time, or did you figure you do kind of?
Oh,
move around?
originally I intended to make it a career.
Okay. All right. Now, where did well, first of all, I guess, in what year did you enlist then?
1957.
Okay. So just out of high school, pretty much.
Well, yeah, except they had a waiting list, so I went in right after high school and got my name on the waiting list, and then I actually was inducted on July 17th.
Okay. And where do they send you for basic training?
Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. At that time, and I believe it still is, the only base the Air Force uses for basic training. There previously had been 2 others, one in New York and one in California, but they consolidated everything.
Right. Now, what did the training actually consist of at that time?
Well, there was classroom time every day, about an hour on military courtesies and how to recognize the different ranks and the different services and things like that. And a close order drill, of course. We had what they call survival training. We just called it bivouac, but it was not like any of the other services. It was only 3 days. Back then, the Army and Marine Corps were still using the M1 Garands. We did not. We used the M1 carbine, which is a smaller, shorter, lighter weapon. But for 2 of the 3 days, we used M1s with no firing pins in them, and practice with dry fire. And then on the 3rd day, we had to go qualify on the firing range. So, and we had to qualify once a year, just in case, you know.
Okay. Now, did you have any problems adjusting to military life?
I think everybody has a problem adjusting to basic training. It's a very big culture shock. But after the first week or so, no.
Now, did they focus a lot on the business of obeying orders and this kind of thing, or was that a little bit more of an Army or Marine Corps thing?
No, you obeyed orders. And for practice, contrary to the other branches, and maybe the Air Force by now, but at that time, we had to call anybody outranked as sir. Now, normally, sir is reserved for commissioned officers, but this was just to get us in the habit. And but we had, we spent half an afternoon when, if the temperature got over 90 degrees, then all outside training was suspended. You had to go indoors. And we spent an afternoon one day just practicing saluting.
Right. Now, how long did the basic training actually last?
Back then it was 12 weeks.
Okay. And then what happens at the end of that?
Well, you either get assigned to a permanent duty station for on-the-job training, or they send you to a tech school.
Okay. And what did you wind up doing?
I went to Airborne Radio Repair School.
Okay. Now, was that at Lackland or somewhere else?
No, that was at Scott Air Force Base, Illinois.
Okay. And what kind of facility was that compared with Lackland?
Well, since I was no longer in basic training, it was much more relaxed. But they were old buildings. They had coal furnaces. And of course, so we had fire guard, and everybody pulled their share of fire guard duty. And we had to march to class in formation, and we had to address the instructor as sir, even though some of them were civilians and some of them were females. So.
Okay. So what actually were they teaching you?
Well, they taught us about 6 weeks of basic electronic theory, but back then it was tube theory. Transistors were not even in common use then, although they'd been invented 9 years before.
Right.
And then we got lab work, and where they would give us some sets that they had disabled, and we had to find out what was wrong with them.
Okay. And
they taught us about 6 or 7 different sets. And we had not only the two-way radios that the pilots and crew used, we also did the navigation receivers. So.
Okay. And did you do pretty well at that kind of work?
Well enough.
Okay. So you passed and got certified or accredited or whatever. All right. Now, when you were there, were you able to go off the base at all? Or
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We had what they call a Class A Liberty Pass, and it's you carry it with you, and anytime you're not required to be on duty, you can leave the post.
Okay. And was there anything to do off the base?
USO dances, movies. It was in Scott is near Belleville, Illinois, and it's a nice little town, but it's probably, I'm guessing from memory, 10 to 15,000. So, it's not a metropolis exactly, more like Smallville.
Right.
But a nice little town, and I suppose if you lived there, there was lots to do. They were wary of airmen simply because so many of them were transient. Most of the place, when you get to a permanent party base, a lot of people live off base. These people are our neighbors. We try to get along with them.
Right.
And we try to build goodwill with the community. And so anyone that does, even transient personnel that does cause a problem, is treated harshly.
All right. Were there any problems while you were there in terms of people or guys you were training with going off and getting drunk or other things like that?
Well, there's always guys going off and getting drunk. The only incident I can remember is that Scott was on federally owned property. And this man had the local police chasing him for what, I don't know. But he's coming down the road at a high rate of speed toward the main gate, and the air policeman is waving him through, As soon as he gets through, he blows the whistle and stops the cop. And now if it was up at K.I. Sawyer, he couldn't have done that, because K.I. Sawyer was leased property, and I had to obey all state and local laws.
All right. Now, after you completed the radio training, did you then get a regular assignment next?
Oh yes, I was sent to Portland, Oregon, 90 miles from home.
Okay. And then what was the base you were assigned to?
Oh, that was an Air Defense Command base, the 460th Fighter Interceptor Group.
Okay.
And Air Defense Command no longer exists. It was absorbed into Tactical Air Command because today's fighters do both tactical and intercept missions. so they don't need the two different commands.
All right. What kind of aircraft did you have there?
Well, originally when I got there, they had Korean vintage F-89s, Scorpions, made by Lockheed, the twin engine, and a good aircraft, but not a well-loved one. Generally speaking, if you lost one engine, you went down. Mm-hmm. But shortly after I got there, they transitioned to F-102s, and which was a very, at that time, it was top of the line. Mm-hmm. The Century Series aircraft they were the first ones that could go faster than the speed of sound in level flight.
Right. Now, what did your duties consist of there?
Well, to begin with, I was an aircraft radio repairman. But as I say, there were so many men, and we had more non-coms than we did enlisted men. There were so many men in from World War II and the Korean War that were killing time until retirement that there was no room for advancement. So I got cross-trained to be an administrative clerk. Cooks, clerks, and air policemen were the only ones that were making rank because they had no retention. Mm-hmm. And got myself, had to give up a stripe to cross-train and be a clerk. But after that, I got stripes back right on minimum time and grade. So.
Okay. So you were doing that cross-training while you were in Portland then?
Yes.
Okay. So you didn't really spend much time being an actual radio repairman?
About a year.
Okay. Now, did you have much actual work to do then, or?
Well, you go out in the morning and you pre-flight all the aircraft, make sure that they're ready to go. And then in the afternoon, you go out when they come back and you check them out for write-ups and everything and take care of anything that's wrong. In between, you study what the Air Force calls technical orders, TOs. Mm-hmm. And that's all the maintenance manuals about the aircraft. So you just make yourself as familiar as you can with it, or about the individual piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. Every piece of equipment in the Air Force has a TO, even the spare tire on a Jeep, which we used Jeeps back then. We didn't have Humvees.
Right. Then would they test you on that material or anything like that, or?
You get tested periodically for your skill level.
Okay.
And the Air Force has 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 level are the skill levels. And you can only go to a certain rank at each skill level. So, and we didn't then. You only had to take the test once, and then you started studying for the next skill level. Mm-hmm. But now I understand you have to retake the test once a year, which is the way the Navy does it. And that's probably smart. Make sure people haven't been goofing off and losing their skills, forgetting things.
All right. Now, this was basically peacetime when you're there. We were not involved in any particular war at that point. But there is a Cold War going on, at least in principle. I mean, to what extent were you worried about the possibility of something happening with, the Soviets or something else like that? Well,
we had two incidents that brought it home to us. After I was at Portland for a couple of years, I was sent to the 641st AC&W Squadron in Labrador. And while I was up there, they had the Berlin Wall crisis. And they had all of our services on alert. President Eisenhower called out the reserves, and they had, again, a bunch of Korean War vintage aircraft flying in the Atlantic going over to boost our forces in Europe. And then when I came back from Goose Bay, I was assigned to K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base up near Marquette, Michigan. And while I was up there, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we were sweating on that one. My brother was in the Navy at the time, and he was assigned to a boiler tender on an old World War II Liberty ship. And they were in the Philippines when it broke. And they set a record getting from the Philippines through the Panama Canal and just offshore of Cuba with a load of combat-ready Marines. Mm-hmm.
So there were moments there.
Oh, yes.
Now, for much of the rest of the time, especially while you were in Portland, did it feel kind of like a regular job after a while? Get up, go to work, do your stuff?
Well, sort of. But we also had regular tests. Um, there are two different types, the tactical evaluations and operational readiness inspections. And these people come in from higher headquarters and they shut the base down in the in the wee hours, and then they have the sirens go off and you pretend you're at war for 2 or 3 days. Mm-hmm. And everything is run just exactly as if you were in war.
Okay. And in those situations, what would you do?
Well, after I became a clerk, when the siren goes off, you get to your duty, so you grab the nearest clothes and get to your duty station. Doesn't matter if they're the ones you wore yesterday and they're all muddy. Then as soon as everybody is checked in and things are settled down, the non-commissioned officer in charge will start sending people back to the barracks so they can change clothes and go to the mess hall and get something to eat. And then come back. Mm-hmm. And then we go about our normal duties. After I became a clerk, during simulated wartime conditions, non-essential personnel are given other duties. So I was put on what they call a turnaround crew for the F-102s. When they come back from a sortie, you have to rearm them, reload their weapons, refuel them, make sure they've got oxygen on board, and generally get them ready for another mission. And this is stuff you're not initially trained for. And you usually don't have the crew chief there because he's probably busy on another aircraft. But in your initial training, they do give you training for that to begin with, so you don't drop something hot and blow things up. And these aircraft were configured to take nuclear missiles. The only ones we had all had blue warheads on them, which means they were orange with the blue warhead, which means they were practice missiles. Mm-hmm. No nukes.
Okay. Now, if you were working on a turnaround crew and so forth, would there be somebody in the crew who knew what he was doing and he just told the rest of you guys what to do? Or?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
There would be a crew chief or an assistant crew chief, maybe not for that aircraft, but for that type of aircraft. So he could oversee things.
Okay. And then the regular duties you had as a clerk during the rest of the time, I mean, what were you actually doing? I mean, when you were in Portland, what kind of stuff were you doing?
Well, I worked for the chief of maintenance, and naturally his office was in the hangar, and he was in charge of all the maintenance on all the aircraft we had, not just the fighters. And we had maintenance orders and maintenance directives to type up all the time, and just general office work to be taken care of, and letters to type, and fortunately, I had 2 semesters of typing in high school.
All right. Now, did you live on the base at that time?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
All single personnel lived on base unless they had a really good reason.
Okay. Now, did you go off the base much and go into Portland?
Oh, yeah. Again, we had the Class A Liberty Pass.
Okay. Then, at a certain point, you switch and you go to Labrador. Was that just a kind of a standard duty rotation?
Routine. Every couple of years you get transferred. Routine transition.
All right.
And unfortunately, I wanted to go to Germany or Japan, but everybody did. Mm-hmm. So I got lucky. So, the worst part of being in Labrador was it was supposed to be a year tour of duty, and I was sent back a month early, 3 weeks before Bob Hope came up. That ticked me off.
It's the one good thing about being there, and you managed to miss it.
Yeah.
What was the base there? What was life like at Goose Bay, and how was it different from being in?
Well, we were on a mountaintop 10 miles from the main base. We were a radar site.
Okay.
With the big white domes and all that. And the road up the mountainside was blasted out of rock, so it was. But we had, again, a bus that went down. But the roads were so steep and so hard. They took a 2.5-ton truck and built a house on the back of it for our bus. When the driver got in, the bus was overloaded. But still, he would take sometimes 10 or 12 people down at a time. And then we had a courier, which there they made me the squadron mail clerk. And I was also the courier. So I got a little 4x4 pickup with a like a camper on the back, but it was locally fabricated out of wood,
Right.
with benches. And I could not let anybody ride in the cab with me, but I could bring passengers in the back. So
Now, what's the weather like there?
very much like the UP. We had snow on July 2nd. The UP is not quite that bad, but there are leeches in the lakes up there. But it doesn't matter because you ain't going swimming in those lakes. And they're like 33 degrees. But they're great fishing. That's what they tell me. I'm not a fisherman. But
All right. And then up on the radar station, I mean, how many people were working up there, do you think?
I think about between 300 and 400.
Okay, so it's a fairly substantial
Oh, yeah.
emplacement at least.
Oh, self-contained, yeah.
So they
We
have
had our own fuel storage and motor pool and mess hall and everything.
Now, was this better duty than being down in the main base, or was it worse because you were higher up and snowier? Or
I think it's about the same, except that the main base was an 18-month tour duty, and up there on the hill it was a year.
okay,
So, and we had easy access to the base, but of course we had to be sure we could get back in time for our scheduled duties. But we even had our own radio station up there. I was a DJ for a while, volunteer, but it was not licensed. The Canadian government allowed us to operate as long as we did not put up an antenna.
Mm-hmm.
So they could hear us locally with a grounded out antenna, actually. And a Canadian Bell system picked us up because we got popular, and they carried us not only all over eastern Canada, but up to Greenland and Iceland to our bases up there.
What were you playing on this station?
A little bit of everything. We had jazz programs, we had easy listening, we had country. You know, big hit of the year while I was up there was Big Bad John. And like I say, a little bit of everything, blues.
Okay, let's see. Tell me a little bit more sort of about the base itself. Was this sort of a major air base with large bombers at it, or everything, or?
No, that base was primarily a fighter base. Mm-hmm. They did have in-air refueling aircraft there, in-flight refuelers. But they were some of the older ones. They were propeller driven. They were modified B-29s. Anything that's used for refueling, they put a K on the front of it. So it was a KB-50. They give them larger engines and a little more speed and able to lift a little more weight.
Now, was Goose Bay also kind of a place for aircraft to stop in transit back and forth across the Atlantic?
Occasionally on the Canadian side of the base. But more often they went to St. John's, Newfoundland, mm-hmm. which was only a couple of 100 miles away, but it was across a body of water because Newfoundland is an island. Right. But politically, Labrador is part of Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. Newfoundland.
Yeah, part of the same province.
Right.
Okay. Now, at a place like Goose Bay, I mean, was there a local population there that you ever saw much of?
We had some Newfoundlanders working there. I don't imagine they lived in the area, but they got a chance for the jobs. And we paid better than the Canadian Air Force, so. But there was a village not far off from the Canadian side called Happy Valley. And we used to go over to the Hudson's Bay store over there. They had some neat stuff. And they also had a couple of bars where some of our boys got in trouble. One guy got liquored up one night and decided he was going to take on 3 Mounties. Well, minimum physical requirements for Mounties at that time was 6'6" and 250 pounds. You don't want to mess with one of them, let alone 3.
Right.
And this guy was average like me, you know. The courage out of a bottle.
Mm-hmm. All right. Tell me a little bit more about sort of the crisis moment. I mean, when they have the Berlin Wall crisis and so forth happens, how did things kind of play out at the base, or what happened there that you observed?
Well, we didn't have much to do there. With that, they just, on the main base, they had to be ready to take care of the extra aircraft coming through. And that was a midway stop for all military aircraft, whereas St. John's was for all civilian.
Right.
And what they call the Great Circle Route. And but a little later on, while I was up there, they had a couple of radio transmission towers out in the desert in Utah or Nevada were blown up. And well, everybody went on alert that time. Nobody knew who did it. They were military. And we were issued our M1 carbines with live ammunition. First time we ever got live ammunition after basic training. Scared the bejesus out of us. Out there at 3 o'clock in the morning in the freezing winter. And then they called it off later. They found out that that was the work of the IRA. That was in 1960, when they were still very active everywhere.
Right. It's not a place one thinks of them normally striking, though.
Well, they hadn't yet learned how to win friends and influence people.
All right. Now, the radar station you were working at, were you looking for Soviet bombers coming at you, or to keep track of the air traffic?
Well, you've all heard of the DEW line. Oh, this was, I'm trying to remember just exactly what they called it. It was the second line of defense radar, and it was watching primarily for Soviet aircraft. Boy, I can't remember that. I think I would.
Did you have any scares? I mean, were there things that they would spot and they didn't know what to do with, or?
I don't know, because if there were, need to know. You know, if you don't need to know, you don't hear about it. And you know, the officer today and the CO would probably hear about it, and that's it. Unless it turned out to be something big. Most of the time, well, what the routine was, if they got an unidentified bogey, they'd contact the main base, who would scramble a couple of fighters up there, and they'd go up and I'd get an identification. Most of the time, they get up where they can, and they also had F-102s there, and get right up where they could read the tail number off the aircraft. And because we also had different kinds of war games. When I was at Portland, Oregon, I have to backtrack a little. That was when Air Defense Command and the Canadian Air Defense Command got together and formed NORAD. And they used to have Tactical Air Command, and sometimes SAC too, would take their larger aircraft out over the North Sea and turn off their transponder equipment, which is identification friend or
North
foe.
Sea or the Arctic Ocean? The North Sea is between England
I'm
and
sorry, the
Scandinavia.
Bering Sea.
Okay, Bering Sea, all right.
Well, it's north.
Yeah.
And turn around and come back with all their identification stuff shut off. And see how far they could get. Flying, you know, below radar and everything, you know. And Alaska got hurt pretty bad, but they never got into Canada.
All right. So Labrador then is sort of your second duty station, and then where did you go after that?
I went to K.I. Sawyer.
Okay, so it's your Marquette, Michigan now, so your Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Well, it's actually by a little bit of nothing called Gwynn. I think there's a gas station and a restaurant there. But, and that whole part of the UP, I don't know of all of the UP, but that part of the UP is heavily populated with people from Finland or their descendants. And great people, great food. Of course, being young, crass GIs, we made fun of them. But they were very nice people, most of them. Except when you got in town, they didn't like military people. They would spot your military glasses or your military shoes. Or the fact that you're wearing white socks with black shoes. I never did, but most of the guys did. And you go in a restaurant, you wait 20, 30 minutes before you can get a glass of water.
Do you have a sense of why there was that hostility?
No, I don't really understand it other than other branches, as I say, we make an attempt to get along with the locals. Other branches of the service have not been very conscientious on that score. And so all military is painted with the same brush.
Well, was there an Army base up in the area or anything like that?
No. But for instance, we used to go down to, come on, Escanaba. And we could get girls to date down there and have a good time. Nice girls, you know, not streetwalkers or anything like that. And except if the Coast Guard cutter was in. If the cutter was in, the girls were locked up someplace. They were out of sight. Parents did not like the Coast Guard. They didn't mind us. There again, when we went off base, we were in civvies. When the Coast Guard hit town, they were in uniform. But while we were up there, we did have a $2 bill payday. And that's where all pay, as much as possible, is given out in $2 bills. And uniform of the day is fatigues, or if you're in the Navy, dungarees. And that's to bring to the attention of the locals where all this local money is coming from and how many military there are there. Just a little heads up. No other action is taken, you know. Well, and everybody, of course, gets the day off. And I don't recall that it did any good. What did some good is when they announced they were going to close KSI here. Then all of a sudden they're buddies. They loved the Air Force. Didn't help.
All right. Now, over the time when you were serving with the Air Force, what kinds of people were you serving alongside? I mean, like, you know, where were they from, or did they have backgrounds like yours, or just...
All kinds. There were guys from the city. There were guys from other parts of the country. A couple from the deep south. Some from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and black, white, brown. You know, I don't remember any Asians. But when I got to Portland, we had some Polynesians, and 3 of them, and great guys.
Now, were there any kind of ethnic or cultural tensions between the different groups in any of these places, either in training or on a base?
Not that I felt. I saw some incidents within one of the ethnic groups, but not with other groups. So.
Now, were most of the people still white, with just sort of a handful of people of other varieties there, or?
Oh no, my flight in basic training was, the flight is roughly 70 men, and I'd say half of it were African American. And some of them from the streets of Philadelphia, you know. So they needed a little polishing up, but they were good guys, you know. A little bit of a hair trigger, a little defensive or over defensive. But if I'd lived their life, I probably would have been too, you know, up to that point.
Do you have a sense that the Air Force got to be at least a little bit selective in terms of who it took, or would they take pretty much anybody who was enlisting in those days?
Pretty much anybody, if you could pass the physical. And now I knew a man who did enlist, went through induction in Portland, Oregon, got down to Lackland, was going through all the testing and everything down there, and they sent him home because he was slightly retarded. Wonderful person. Of course, if you've ever known a retarded person, they are all the nicest people on earth. They don't want to offend anybody. And but they do want to help. They want to contribute. And that's the way he was.
What would you say morale was like on these different bases?
Most of the time, pretty good. Even in Goose Bay.
Did the Air Force do much to kind of try to maintain morale, or?
Oh yeah, number one, the food was great. I was in 6 years and 4 months, and there was only 2 meals that we had more than once that were even iffy. And one was the corned beef. Was delicious, but it was rubbery. They didn't cook it, didn't boil it long enough. So you chewed what you could out of it and put it back on the plate. You didn't dare swallow it, you'd be plugged for a week. And the other one was liver, and most of the time that was not a problem. If there was a lull in the line and liver on the grill, if it stayed on the grill, it would get green and leathery. Most of the cooks would throw it away. Only a few hard noses would serve it to the next people that come in. But most of the time, the food was great. We had steak for every Sunday dinner. I mean, steak. We had these china patterns. After after you get out of training command, you get the china dishes and platters like that, and the steak covered the whole platter. And every Friday, some kind of seafood. It was usually shrimp or scallops. When I was up at K.S. Sawyer, I worked in the alert facility for the bomber alert facility for a while, and they got frog legs. And I don't think what else they got. A couple of other things. Oh yeah, they had lobster tails once in a while. Mm-hmm. But there again, it's all for. We don't go out like the Army and the Corps, convinced that we're the roughest, toughest, meanest, nastiest guys in the world, and you better stay out of our way. The Air Force builds their morale with goodies like good food and pride in their professionalism. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if you don't keep up to the professional standards, you will be involuntarily cross-trained, which they call reclassified, or you will be reclassified to a civilian. And how bad it is depends on whether or not you get a good discharge or a bad one. It won't be honorable. It might be a general, but it could be under honorable or dishonorable or less than honorable conditions. Could be a BCD, bad conduct discharge. Could be convenience of the government discharge, which is nice and non-committal. Mm-hmm. The Air Force tends to be a little easier on people than the other branches in that regard, unless they get someone who's a real bad one.
All right. Now at Sawyer, tell me a little bit more about your assignment there, the unit you were with and what they were doing.
Well, initially I was with what they call the Standardization Board. And there were several B-52 crews and several tanker crews. They had KC-135s there. And it was their job to take all of the other crews and see that they maintained their proficiency at their job. And a lot of what they did was top secret, so I can't say a whole lot about it. But these were full crews. They had gunners teaching gunners and testing gunners, and so forth. They don't use gunners anymore on them. But, and the same thing with the tanker crews. And then they pulled me out of there and sent me over to the alert facility. And had two different bosses over there. That's a little different over there too, because everything is very much more relaxed inside that building, unless the klaxon goes off. And yeah, there was an incident there. They had, SAC had a two-man policy with the B-52s. If they were armed with nuclear weapons, you could never have one man go aboard alone. Always had to be at least two men, and it's called a two-man policy, for obvious reasons. And we had an alert one day. They could go, they had crew cab pickups. They could go over to the BX or whatever. And this one man, the rest of his crew was gone, and we had an alert, a scramble. Now they have 15 minutes to get the bombers airborne. They can't do it as quick as a fighter. But he ran out and started up the ladder, and the sentry warned him, "Sir, I can't let you board that aircraft alone." He says, "It's an alert, it's wartime, we gotta do this." And then he heard the rack slide back on the man's rifle. He said, "Sir, I'm warning you again, and this is the last time, don't go up that ladder." So after it was all over, he had that guard brought into my boss's office, who was the alert commandant, and complaining about him. And he looked at him and he says, "You know, Lieutenant, you're lucky you're not dead." He said he did exactly as he was trained to do. And if he hadn't, he'd be on his way out of the Air Force. We had our own, well, they didn't call them air police out there, it was security police, but it was a branch of the air police. But they had special equipment too. So that young lieutenant learned a lesson that day. And he honestly thought he wasn't being an upstart. He honestly thought he was doing the right thing. Because when a klaxon goes off, you're pretending that you're in wartime. But even in wartime, the two-man policy applies. so I don't get a rogue pilot taking off and bombing somebody. Same reason it takes 2 men, even though they're on the ship, those weapons are not armed. And it takes 2 men to arm them. And they get a code from the president. And these 2 men, number one, they have to decode the message exactly the same, right down to dotting the I's and commas and everything before they can do it.
All right. And then you mentioned also that you were up there. Were you with this command when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened?
Yes.
All right. And then sort of how long were you on alert, or how was that different from the drills that you had?
I did not see sunlight from the day President Kennedy made his speech. I think that was October 26th, but I'm not sure, until December 27th. I was stuck in the mohole. It was what we call the place. It was half underground. And, but, we got extra movies in for me to show the air crews, and I was their projectionist. And lots of stuff in there to do, because you got men on alert for a month at a time. And they could easily go bonkers if you didn't have a lot to do there. And plus having the trucks, and I was only there 8 hours a day unless I got called back for something. And
So you did see light of day, or because it wasn't
not during that period.
Not that.
I had a cot issued to me, and
Okay. So you're actually staying in the bunkers.
I slept in the theater room. And we only had folding chairs anyway, so I just folded a few of them up and set up my cot and sack out.
All right.
Sometimes I did get back to the barracks, but it was after dark, and I'd have to be back out there before sunup. So.
Okay. Now, was this a case where things were really tense for a few days, and then kind of nothing happened? You started to think maybe nothing would happen, or did the intensity level stay the same the whole time?
Intensity level was pretty much the same. We were ready. We were very, very close, closer than most people think, and closer than even we knew at the time, because they have found out in recent years that some of the missiles that were set up in Cuba were ready to go. There was like a dozen of them. Could have hit any place up through the Midwest, in Texas and the East Coast. And Castro wanted to use them, and Khrushchev wouldn't let him. And since it was Khrushchev's troops that were down there setting them up and trying to train the Cubans to use them, but they still, they kept the keys to the ignition.
Right.
And
a good thing too, in the
yes,
long run.
Yes. I remember when it was over, Kennedy told his cabinet, he said, "I don't want anybody gloating. We are all going to laud Premier Khrushchev for his being a man of peace and a peace seeker." And they did. He still lost his job, but it cost him the premiership.
So it's kind of a reminder here that the period that we now kind of look back on as the Cold War, which has now been over for 20 years, there were phases of that that were pretty intense and pretty serious.
Hot. Yeah, pretty hot. Khrushchev underestimated President Kennedy because of the Bay of Pigs thing. Kennedy had so many advisors giving him opposing advice on that, he did nothing. And it turned into a debacle. So next time things got hot, he listened to his advisors, thought it over, and made up his mind, and as it turns out, took the best possible course.
Okay. Now, how long was that before you wound up finishing your tour of duty? I mean, how much longer were you in the Air Force after that?
That was in
So we get to December '62.
December '62. Well, I got out in '66. No,
'63?
'63. You're right. I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah, '63.
So you got sort of the better part of a year left still at that point to go. Okay. Now, did you consider re-enlisting?
Oh, absolutely. But my intentions had been when I went in to make a career of it. But I was getting really bored, and the only thing they offered me to get out of there was And I didn't like K.I. Sawyer. It's rather remote up there. And I still got to Chicago twice a month, but it's a long drive.
Yep.
And they offered me a position as a general's orderly. It's not particularly bad duty. It's not particularly good duty. I just didn't feel it was what I wanted to do.
And did you have an idea by that time of maybe what you did want to do?
Nary a glimmer. Dumbest thing I ever did was getting out with that. And I probably would have had a very successful career if I'd stayed in. On the other hand, I probably would never have met my wife. So there's a reason things happen.
All right. So once you then did leave the Air Force, then sort of the end of '63, what did you do after that?
Well, initially I went to live with my mother in Evanston, Illinois, and got a job in a bookstore down there, and became engaged to a girl who lived in Grand Rapids, so I moved up here. And the engagement did not fare well, but I stayed up here anyway, worked as a bookkeeper for Skelly Oil Company, which was, well, now it's Alto Gas, and they're a propane plant out in Alto. Mm-hmm. And then I did a stint as an aircraft instrument calibrator at R.C. Allen. That's gone now. That branch closed. Spent most of my adult life doing, because of my electronics training in the Air Force, electromechanical service work. The biggest share of it was with vending machines. Although the last 3 or 4 years in it, I was a PC technician. So.
All right. If you kind of look back at the time you spent in the military, what do you think you took out of that, or what effect did it have on you? Did you learn things from there, or did it change you at all?
Well, it gave me a lot of self-confidence I didn't have before. I realized I could do things that other people had said I was too damn dumb to do. And that I wasn't dumb. It was funny when I was taking my tests at Lackland. They call them QED tests. I don't know why, but they're the skills tests, written tests. Got done, and the guy is scratching his head, and I asked him if anything is wrong. He says, "I don't know where to send you. You can do anything." It turns out I haven't had an IQ of like 125, which is not sky high, but it's above average. Mm-hmm. And it was certainly more than I'd been led to believe by my cohorts growing up. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, do you think that military service is something that everybody ought to do, or ought to be on a larger scale than it is now?
Oh, yes, I definitely think so. Well, to begin with, if they did away with the requirement for a high school diploma, which they didn't have when I went in, they could get a lot more volunteers. Get a lot of young people off the streets who can't find work, give them work, give them a sense of self-worth, self-discipline, and confidence. And whether they stay more than one hitch or not, they're going to come out a better person. Except for those unfortunate few who don't make it back. And those we pray for.
All right. Now, if you look back at the time that you spent in the Air Force, are there any other kind of individual incidents or episodes or things that tend to come back to you that you haven't discussed here yet today?
I don't think anything of real importance. A couple of amusing incidents, that's about it.
Okay, well, what were those?
Well, while I was in basic training, we had a man went over the hill, went AWOL. Whereas the Air Force at that time had a short-sleeved tan summer uniform. They were just breaking away from the old Army khakis. And he wore it under his fatigues. And there's no fence around Lackland, and there's a freeway that cuts right through the middle of it. So he just went down and took his flight cap, which is the folding flat wool cap, with him, and went down there and took off his fatigues and put on his flight cap and thumbed his way out of there. We found out the next day he was already AWOL from the Marine Corps.
Oh.
So he was in double duty, deep duty, when they finally caught him. and they will catch him. The stupidest thing he could have done was, after going AWOL from the Corps, is to go into another branch, or going AWOL from any branch, because they check up on those things. You know, the FBI already had his fingerprints. All they had to do was wait until they got him from Lackland, and they, whoop, bingo.
So he wasn't at Lackland very long.
No. Apparently he heard him talking and realized that either way he wasn't going to be there very long.
So he took off a little early. All right. And then was there another incident or something from one of these places that you remember?
No, nothing that would really contribute to
There will be after we turn
what
the
we're
camera
doing.
off.
Oh, absolutely.
That usually works.
And tomorrow.
All right. Well, in the meantime, you've filled in a lot of interesting information, useful material. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
But this was a time between our hot wars. And at the time that I got out, my enlistment period was considered post-Korean, pre-Vietnam. Now they have changed the dates of the Vietnam War, so I overlap about 6 months into that.
Right.
So by that reckoning, I'm a Vietnam vet, but I hate like hell to say it, because I have too much respect for the people that served over there.
Right. You were a Vietnam era vet.
The only country I was in was England, you know, so.
Canada.
Yeah. But I mean, during the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
I spent my last 4 months in England. I extended my enlistment 4 months.
Well, now, you hadn't mentioned that before.
I'm sorry. President Kennedy had a program they called Project Short Spurt, where he wanted to, instead of sending people PCS, or permanent change of station, to Europe, where they could bring back all this duty-free stuff, he was trying to lower the balance of payments and everything. He cut it down to 120 days, or 4 months, 120 days temporary duty. And you could bring back a lot less, a little, but not much. And of course, being smart alecks in the Air Force, instead of Operation Short Spurt, we called it Operation Sport Shirt. But I got 4 months in England, which I enjoyed thoroughly. So.
And where do they base you in England?
I was at RAF Lakenheath, which is all of our bases over there are RAF bases. We don't own any.
Right.
And it was about 4 miles from RAF Mildenhall, which is the central base for the UK. That's where all the people that are transferred to the UK come in there. A lot of them that are going to Europe have a stay over there. And all the transports and freight and everything is out of there. Mildenhall had a huge hospital there, again, for all personnel, military and civilian employees of the U.S. government and their dependents could be treated at that hospital. We also had a boarding school there for all military and civilian employees.
Okay. And what kind of work were you doing while you were there?
I was still clerical.
And were you working for a particular unit or office or?
I cannot remember the name, the number, because I was there such a short time. It was a tactical fighter group, and it was in what they call USAFE. There's USAFE and USAFE, and they're spelled identical. USAFE is United States Armed Forces Europe. USAFE is United States Air Forces Europe. One word difference. And I forget where I was going with that.
Well, I was going to just asking about what unit you were with or what you were doing.
Oh yeah. I do know that our office was right by one end of the runway, and it was a remote end of the runway, and they were flying F-100s, which was the first Century Series aircraft, and they landed one day with a hung bomb under the wing. That means the bomb is armed. If it lets go, it's going to boom. And they brought it down to our end of the runway to disarm it and then take it loose. So I'll tell you, those EOD guys, they got to be a little bit crazy, but they got my respect as much as anyone in combat.
All right. And while you were there, did you get to go into London or into bigger towns and travel around at all?
Well, we got into Cambridge quite frequently. That was only about 20 miles away, and we could hitchhike in there.
Yeah.
I got into London once. We got one weekend, and that was pretty nice. Didn't get in to see it, but we stood outside the theater when they were opening the doors and having all the big shots come in for the world premiere of a James Bond movie, From Russia with Love. I think it was the second one. And
now, did the
of
English
course, we
people...
went and saw Piccadilly Circus, which has been cleaned up a little over the years. At least it had been then.
Now, could the English people in the streets, would they look at you and know you were American military personnel, or?
The minute we opened our mouths. And the biggest thing over there is there's some words, it's supposed to be the same language, but it really isn't. That in this country are perfectly innocent slang words that in England are not, and vice versa. And it can get you into trouble real quick.
Aside from that kind of communication thing, was there much tension between the English and the Americans at that point, or were they pretty friendly to you? Or?
Oh, they were very friendly. I mean, the average working stiff, you know, we didn't do it the high muckety mucks.
Right.
But, no, it was, they were great. I loved them. Enjoyed it very much.
And if the Air Force were offering you more of that kind of duty, maybe you would have stayed in?
Might have been. Might have been. I was almost due for another tour overseas. And so, yeah, it was great over there. A couple of amusing, when we have commander's call every month, and your squadron commander gets you any some place to meet together, usually the base theater, and goes through things that are on his list that have to be brought to everybody that he doesn't just want to post on the bulletin board. And one thing, our squadron commander there was a young first lieutenant from the south with a drawl you could cut with a knife. And he's getting up there that first month I was there and talking about guys taking girls, and we lived in World War II Quonset huts. Guys taking women in their Quonset huts. He said, that is not allowed. That will get you bad time, which you will have to make up at the end of your enlistment. You don't want to do that. These living areas were in spokes out from the main base, like spokes on a wheel, and there were farmers' fields between them, most of them growing alfalfa. He says, if you feel that you have to give that girl some personal attention, he says, take her out in that alfalfa field. Next month he got up and he says, I guess I failed to neglect last month. When you take these young ladies out to that alfalfa field, she's got to say yes. There were a lot of young ladies over there that would do anything to marry a Yank GI. And there was no minimum age on drinking over there, and no such thing as statutory rape. But if she claimed it was unwilling, you would be forced to marry her. Have two governments on your back for that. And that was the first place I was ever at. We had civilian KPs, and they only paid them 50 cents an hour. Now, why? You know, the people were getting like anywhere from $65 to $90 a week for that kind of work back home, because their government won't allow it. It would inflate the local economy. Girl I dated worked for the phone company over there, which was run by the government. She made 10 quid a week, 10 pounds a week.
Right.
At that time, that was $28.
Which is not very much even then.
No. And like I say, people in the States making anywhere from 65 to 90 at the low-paying jobs. And we hitchhiking into
Cambridge? Or?
Cambridge one day, and a guy picked us up in a Mini Cooper. Yes, they've been around that long. And he was bragging about how he got 50 miles per gallon with it. Well, we didn't realize at the time that over there they use the imperial gallon, which is 5 quarts. So of course he got 50 miles to the gallon with it. Makes perfect sense when you know that. And that was our first experience with traffic circles, but they call them roundabouts over there. They too make a lot of sense. And you drive through the countryside, and there's no wires overhead, no poles, it's all underground since the Blitz. There'll never be another Blitz. But when they have severe weather, they don't have the outages we do either.
Now, did you ever take a shot at driving while you were in England, or
No.
did not take a Jeep out?
No, but I saw a very lucky first lieutenant, I think he was dating some farmer's daughter. And the farmer said, I got a car you might be interested in. I think it was a 1929 Rolls-Royce Silver Phantom or something like that. All it needed was tires. Put a battery in it, hit the ignition, fired right up, purred like a kitten. 25 pounds. Pound was $2.80 at that time. So roughly 50 bucks.
Well, I hope he drove it
60
carefully.
bucks. And he brought it, he was there PCS, he brought it back to the States duty free. And I saw a brand new 63 Ford over there with right-hand drive. That was an oddity for me, of course. And the taxis were all the same taxis they used in World War II. I mean, they could easily get 1 million miles out of a vehicle over there. They take such good care of them. You don't see old clunkers on the road over there like you do here. To begin with, they cost a lot of money. The fuel is high. At that time, it was still like 35 cents a gallon, maybe 40 here in the States, and they were paying $1.50. But they also have unbelievable road taxes that go by the weight of your car. So it's very expensive to own a car over there, even a little Morris Minor or something like that. That's why they are so small with gas-saving engines.
Right. Well, it sounds like you were there at a point when they were still, in certain ways, pulling things back together from World War II, where wages were still lower, things like that. In other ways, it had moved along quite a way since then, but a different place from being in the States.
Well, yeah, they weren't, for instance, buying so many aircraft from us as they are now. They, of course, and they still make some of their own, but they made their own bombers they called V bombers, and they were delta wing bombers. I suppose the V stood for victory, but they were subsonic and not very fast even at that, but they were jet engine. I wanted very badly to take the British Railways tours of Ireland and Scotland, but I never could get the time off. When you're only there for 4 months,
Right.
They don't let you have a week off. So I had a chance to go to Berlin, but I had to have enough money, and it was a hop over, and I had to have, anytime you take a military hop someplace, you have to prove that you have enough money to fly back commercially if you have to, if you can't get a hop. So I didn't have it.
When you were at the other bases in the States, did you ever go up in any of the aircraft they had, or?
I used to ride up when I was at Portland with some of the guys in the Air Force Reserve unit there with the troop transport, and they had World War II transports. Old Curtiss C-46 Commando.
Not quite the same as going up in a jet or something like that.
Oh, no.
All right. Well, I think we may have wound ourselves back around to the conclusion now for the second time, but I'm glad we got in that last chunk of stuff about England there.
Well, my mind tends to wander, and I could probably ramble on all day, but better not.
All right. Well, thank you then. That'll do it.